Between July 1963 and October 1965, something deeply unsettling unfolded around Manchester. 5 young victims, aged just 10 to 17, vanished one by one, leaving behind confusion, fear, and a growing sense that something wasn't right. At first, these disappearances seemed unrelated. Different places, different days, no clear pattern. But what no one realised at the time was that these cases were connected by something far more calculated. Hidden far from the city, across the quiet, empty stretch of Saddleworth Moor, a dark truth was being buried. Before we continue, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel, and let's dive into the man at the centre of it all. Ian Brady didn't stand out in a crowd. On the surface, he was just another young man trying to build a life. But his past told a different story. Born in 1938 in Glasgow, he grew up without stability, raised by foster parents before later rejoining his mother. As a teenager, trouble followed him closely. By 17, he had already been sent to prison for theft after earlier appearances in juvenile court for burglary and other offences. These weren't isolated mistakes, they were part of a pattern that kept growing. When he moved to Manchester, things didn't improve. He worked different jobs but struggled to stay settled. What stood out more was how he spent his time alone. He read books that focused on control, power, and extreme ideologies. He studied them deeply, almost obsessively, as if shaping the way he saw the world. At work, people saw him as quiet and punctual, but also short-tempered. Nothing about him openly revealed what was building underneath. From the outside, everything looked normal, but behind that calm surface, something far more calculated was slowly taking shape. And soon, someone else stepped into that world and became part of it. Myra Hindley grew up in Manchester, born in 1942, in a home shaped by tension and instability. Her father was known to be violent, and from a young age, she was taught to be tough, even encouraged to fight back physically. At just 8 years old, she was pushed to defend herself in a way that left a lasting mark. Later, she would describe that moment clearly. At 8 years old, I'd scored my first victory. Her early life wasn't easy. She spent time living with her grandmother, and by her teenage years, she was already dealing with guilt and emotional strain after the drowning of a close friend. That moment stayed with her. Despite this, she appeared to live a normal life. She worked regular jobs and was seen as friendly enough that co-workers once collected money to replace her lost wages. But things began to change when she joined Millwoods in 1961, where she met Brady. What started as curiosity quickly turned into deep obsession. She changed how she looked, how she thought, and even what she believed. Over time, she became completely drawn into his world. This wasn't a sudden shift. It happened slowly, step by step. And once their connection deepened, it didn't just stay personal. It started turning into something far more dangerous. By the early 1960s, the relationship between Ian Brady and Myra Hindley had grown far beyond a normal connection. They spent hours together, not just talking, but studying ideas that focused on control, crime, and power. Their time wasn't casual. It was focused, intense, and slowly shaping their actions. They read books about extreme ideologies, philosophy, and violence, often sitting together during lunch breaks, going through these ideas line by line. This wasn't just interest. It became a shared mindset. Around July 1963, the tone shifted even further. Brady began talking about committing what he called the perfect murder. This idea didn't come out of nowhere. It was influenced by stories they had already explored, including detailed crime narratives that focused on planning and execution. Their actions began to reflect those thoughts. Hindley started hiring vehicles. Together, they discussed robbery plans and even tried to prepare for them by collecting items like weapons. But those plans never fully happened. Instead, their focus moved somewhere else, something more controlled, more calculated. What started as discussion was no longer just talk. It was turning into something real. And not long after that, on 12 July 1963, they put that plan into action for the very first time. Their first known victim was Pauline Reade, age 16. That evening, she was on her way to a dance when Myra Hindley offered her a lift. It didn't seem unusual. Pauline knew her family, which made the situation feel safe. That trust became the key. Instead of taking her to her destination, she was driven towards Saddleworth Moor. Ian Brady followed on a motorcycle, keeping distance, but staying close enough to carry out what had already been planned. The location wasn't random. It had been chosen earlier, quiet and isolated. Once there, Pauline was taken onto the moor. What happened next remained hidden for years, but what is clear is that she never returned. Afterward, her body was buried in a prepared spot, out of sight and far from attention. No immediate witnesses, no clear evidence, and no direct link back to them. At the time, her disappearance raised concern, but nothing pointed toward the truth. They were not even questioned. And that realization changed everything. Because once they understood they could do this without being caught, they didn't stop there. After the first disappearance, the pattern didn't stop. It continued, more controlled each time. In November 1963, John Kilbride, aged 12, was approached near a market in Ashton under Lyne. He was offered a lift and promised something simple in return. It was enough to gain his trust. He never made it home. A massive search followed. Over 700 statements were taken and around 2,000 volunteers joined efforts to find him. But despite all of that, there were no clear answers. Months later, in June 1964, Keith Bennett, also 12, disappeared while walking to his grandmother's house. Once again, the approach was simple. A request for help, a short ride, then silence. This time, suspicion even fell on people close to him. His stepfather was questioned multiple times and police searches extended across entire streets, but nothing led back to Brady or Hindley. What made this even more unsettling was how normal they appeared. They lived among others, spoke casually, and continued daily life without drawing attention. Each time, the same method worked. Trust, isolation, and no immediate trace. And with every disappearance, their confidence grew stronger. But what they did next left behind something that couldn't stay hidden forever. On 26 December 1964, Leslie Ann Downey, aged 10, disappeared from a fun fair in Ancoats. She had been approached in a familiar way, a simple request for help carrying items to a nearby car. It sounded harmless, but instead of going home, she was taken to the house on Wardlebrook Avenue. Inside that house, something happened that would later become one of the most disturbing parts of the case. There was a 16-minute audio recording capturing her voice, where she could be heard identifying herself and pleading to be allowed to return home. Alongside that, there were also photographs taken during that time. These were later discovered among stored belongings, carefully kept instead of being destroyed. This wasn't just about what was done, it was about what was kept, recorded, documented. For a long time, none of this was known publicly. It remained hidden, locked away, while life outside continued as normal. But evidence like that doesn't stay buried forever. And soon, one final mistake exposed everything they had tried to keep hidden. By 6 October 1965, everything changed. That night, Edward Evans, aged 17, was brought to the house on Wardlebrook Avenue. But this time, something was different. Someone else was involved. David Smith, who was related to Myra Hindley, had been asked to come over. He had no idea what he was walking into. What he witnessed inside that house stayed with him. He later described the moment clearly. "I heard a hell of a scream. It sounded like a woman, really high-pitched." The situation quickly escalated. After leaving the house, he didn't stay silent. In the early hours of the morning, around 6:10 a.m, he went to a phone box and contacted the police. That single decision changed everything. Police arrived at the house soon after. At first, nothing seemed obvious, but when they gained access to a locked room, they found Evan's body inside. From that moment, the situation moved fast. Arrests followed. Searches began. And what was hidden for over 2 years started to come to light. Because once the police stepped inside, they didn't just find one crime. They uncovered the beginning of something far bigger than anyone had imagined. After the arrests, the case quickly moved toward trial. In April 1966, Ian Brady and Myra Hindley stood in court facing charges connected to multiple victims. The trial lasted 14 days, and the evidence presented was difficult to ignore. Among the most powerful pieces was the 16-minute audio recording, along with photographs that had been recovered. These revealed details that had remained hidden until then. On 6 May 1966, the verdict was delivered. Brady was found guilty of 3 murders, while Hindley was convicted of 2 along with additional involvement in another case. Both received life sentences. But the story didn't end there. Years later, in 1987, both admitted involvement in 2 more killings. This led to the discovery of Pauline Reade's body more than 2 decades after her disappearance. Yet one question still remains unanswered. The body of Keith Bennett was never found, despite repeated searches over the years. Even with confessions, not everything was recovered. And that's what makes this case different. Because even after decades, while most of the truth was uncovered, some of it is still buried, somewhere out there on the moors. In the end, 5 lives were lost between 1963 and 1965, and all that was left was a story that continues to stay in people's minds long after both offenders died: Myra Hindley in 2002 and Ian Brady in 2017. But beyond the facts, there's something deeper here. A reminder of how ordinary faces can hide something far more calculated. So, which part of the Moors murders case do you find the most unsettling? Do you think the Moors will ever give up their final secret? Or has Ian Brady won his final cruel game? Before you leave, make sure to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Thanks for watching.